Welcome. My name is David Andreozzi. I'm an architect and the president of the New England Chapter of the Institute of Classical Architecture and Art. We are here today to share some insight and secrets from our industry friends on what we have learned about interviewing and recommending design professionals within our own fields, and how we each recommend other allied designers to our clients as we build our teams. But let's start with the problem. Most new to the process mistakenly rely on publications or neighbors' recommendations to choose a designer. But real custom design does not come together that way. Rather than follow others' desires, we challenge you to consider searching for a designer that will best reflect your own design soul. Therein lies the true beauty of bespoke design. It is a representation about you, not someone else. A talented designer can bring you there. We are hoping that this fast-moving, informal, back-and-forth experience with some pre-planned areas of discussion will be invigorating, so buckle up. So let's start by introducing ourselves. Janice?
Hello, and I'm very happy to be here, so thank you so much, David. I would just say that my very first memory is of a flower, and it was a peony because it was as large as my head, and I was only about 18 months old. And that solidified and made me aware of my passion and connection to the natural world, which is, frankly, my safe and magical space. I was born and raised in New York City, so I did study the natural and urban environment as I grew up. Not knowing I was, but I certainly was aware of it all around me. I started working in the floral business as a teenager, decorating Studio 54 after school. And I was exposed to a lot of interesting experiences, and we designed floral events for the public and private spaces in a very interesting and unique way. That led me to know that I wanted to spend my life in natural environment, and then landscape design seemed the next obvious step. And I studied at Parsons, and then my true moment came when I met John Brooks, and I studied with him in England. At the Clock House School of Garden Design. In 1984, I opened up my own firm, and I chose to get my architecture license through independent training, practical experience, and mentorship from other professionals. And I passed my national board exams without the formal education. I do insist on constant training of myself and my teams. We run a very team office, and we do a lot of work on continuing all of our independent studies. I'm also chairman of the Chairman's Council and a member of the board of trustees for Bette Midler's New York Restoration Project, and I've been there for 25 years. And the work that we do there, which is all pro bono, of course, is the most meaningful thing I've ever done in my life. We have created an incredible amount of wonderful spaces and access to nature that would otherwise be non-existent in underserved communities. And I adore residential design, and I love my clients. And I've been incredibly fortunate to be able to find something that I love so much to do for my entire life. So thank you.
Thank you, Janice. Anne?
Hi, good morning. Anne Fairfax here. I am with Fairfax and Sammons Architects. I came to architecture sort of as a maker. I think I grew up in Honolulu, very active outdoor life, but I did a lot of sewing. Honolulu is interesting, and Hawaii girls also. So my friends and I used to run up a dress on a Thursday night and wear it on a Friday. So I was used to using my hands and used to kind of getting involved with making things. And I ended up my first year of college at Goddard College in a design build program. So you would design something and then actually do the carpentry. So I was that really suited my kind of maker mentality of rolling up my sleeves and actually doing things myself. I was also involved in graphic design and did a lot of drawing. And I kind of came to the architecture a few years later in my 20s. I went to the University of Virginia and their architecture school, finished up, got licensed. That's where I met my partner and my husband, Richard Sammons. We teamed up in New York in the early 90s and started our firm together. Slow start. We didn't have any connections. We didn't have any old school ties in New York. Neither of us were from New York. But through kind of word of mouth, we were able to get into the domestic and residential design. And we've had great success with our teams. We have two offices. We honeymooned in Palm Beach, and I really loved Palm Beach, and I thought, well, here's a way to bring a little bit of Honolulu with me into my career on the East Coast. And so we started that firm many years ago. We have these two fantastic firms. They function independently in that they have different different kind of spheres of geographic reach, but we do a lot of work together too. So in a way, it's good we have this bandwidth that can get large projects done as well as be concentrating on the smaller projects. We like projects of all different sizes. We might consider ourselves versatile, I think. We do large and small. We look at the context. We look at we try to tailor the project to the client as much as we can. We're very. I love having this webinar because it is a team effort. It's not just, as you can see from this photograph here. This was designers Betsy Shiverick. We designed the paneling, but we came to this aesthetic and this look with the interior designer, and it's 1 and 1 makes 3 here. I think the excitement of working with talented people, professionals who know what they're doing, and can deliver a fabulous project to the owner is what gets us up every day. So working with the landscape, it's especially in the domestic realm, you really need to have your team and work well, and that's something that we love to do. So thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Susan?
I'm Suzanne Casler from Atlanta, Georgia, and I specialize in high-end residential interiors, and we also do some hospitality work. I moved here to Atlanta from Indianapolis, Indiana, about over 20 years ago, and we moved here with my husband was transferred with Steelcase at the time, and my background really was the University of Cincinnati's Interior Architecture Department and School. I specialized first in commercial design in Indiana, but I kept being drawn to art and people and antiques and residential. So when we moved to Atlanta, it was the perfect place for me to just specialize in high-end residential. It's amazing to me how the South has really kept that whole reverence for classical architecture. I think some of the most beautiful homes are in the South. And what I love most, I always talk about, it is all about the architecture. And then the interiors are kind of that next layer. So I always love working as a team with the architect, and the landscape architect is as important to me as having all 3 of us on the team with certainly the great client. Today, what's so great about design is our clients have such a sensitivity and maybe more awareness of design. And I think there's an exciting time that everyone's appreciating good design and also appreciating this kind of team approach that really creates the best work. And so that is kind of something that I always love focusing on. And I have been really involved in the ICAA. I was president of the chapter in the Southeast last year. I have been on the board for many years, and I've also been involved in SCAD here in Atlanta as well. And it's very exciting for me to continue to see this appreciation, how really beautiful and great architecture and design makes a real difference in our world. I'm excited to be here.
Fantastic. It's interesting, both of you, to jump in, Ann and Susan, basically the 1 and 1 is 3, and then the teamwork, it's all the exact same thing. It's all what makes great art, great design. That's interesting. You both bounced off of that. Andrew?
Yes, thank you. My name is Andrew Cogar, the president of Historical Concepts, an architecture and planning firm with offices in Atlanta and in New York. We have worked for a long time throughout the Southeast, but over the past close to a decade now, have really grown our practice in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. We've also expanded to the Midwest and the West Coast. I think what has allowed that expansion is our approach to design. We are very academic-based, research-based. We focus on classical and traditional, but with a specific emphasis on regional and local precedent. And we really like to roll up our sleeves and try and understand what makes a specific language and architectural style in a region what it is. And our guidepost for design is appropriate. We try and make sure that whatever we're designing is appropriate within that regional and local context. And what that's done is allowed us to go to a lot of different places with a lot of different aesthetics and collaborate with a lot of different other design team members. We're a firm that is 43 people strong. We have 5 design studios, and we like to feel that we give our clients a small firm feel with the added depth of a larger firm. So each studio is about 5 to 6 members, and we'll work hand in hand with the clients. Our approach to design, being academic based as opposed to a singular style or kind of more egocentric design aesthetic, allows us to really internally focus and grow as a team. All of our principals started as interns within our firm. And we have a real strength, I think, in self-improvement, self-education, and self-growth within the firm. But that also lends really well to collaboration. We have a lot of different tiers within our team members that can work directly with interior designers, with landscape architects. Internally, design decisions are made based on ideas, not based on hierarchy. We have a firm belief that a good idea stands in an open forum. So I think all of those things allow us to plug in really well with the other design professionals and with our clients, no matter what region we're working in, and whether, again, it's commercial or planning or our primary body of work, high-end residential. So really looking forward to the conversation today. Really happy to be here and amongst friends, and look forward to the questions that come. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. As I mentioned, I'm an architect, mostly traditional, mostly residential. When I was young, my father was a carpenter, and then a contractor, and then a developer. My mom was a self-taught, very talented interior decorator. So as you can imagine, I was involved with construction from a very early age, mastering the techniques of construction, starting with carrying junk to the dumpster. But I would eventually learn carpentry, millworking, construction management, and later on in high school and college, I was drafting, and later on I attended RISD and learned furniture making. So sort of really the hands-on part of the architecture. After graduating in the mid-'80s, I went to work originally for Rob Reno, who had just left Shope Reno Wharton, a firm that had started about 6 years earlier. And then after about 6 months or so, I ended up starting at Shope Reno Wharton. I was one of the few people that were lucky enough to work for all 3 of the partners, Rob Reno, Alan Shope, and Bernard Wharton. It was a very, very special time at the time. And that experience really left a strong mark on my trajectory forwards on residential architecture, sort of historically based, expressive of place and timeless in beauty. Philanthropically, I was a past national chairman of the AIA CRAN, Custom Residential Architecture Network, and then left the AIA to join our New England ICAA chapter. So that's a little bit about, and it's interesting is that all of the same things, vernacular, local labor, this is what we really care about. And we think about how can we change the world going forward, to think about architecture relating to people, architecture relating to culture, irrespective of style, and then also, again, local labor and local materials. So I will start. Let's have some fun. My first topic, and then more topics than questions, is to encourage all of the participants to say, if you were to encourage somebody to think about how to interview somebody in your own field, how would you do it? What would you recommend to them? And I'll start, and I'll say, I know it sounds crazy, but it's not about the awards, it's not about individual fame, and it's not about publications. I mean, the glossy magazines and the internet fame is wonderful and housing Pinterest, an incredible self-discovery tool, but that's not what it's about. I would encourage people to say that's about culling together all the information to discover what is you love in your own soul. So you're the one that's going to individually figure out what you love, and it shouldn't necessarily be what the designer is all about. Now listen, if somebody wants a Frank Gehry, then they can go get a Frank Gehry because they're going to get the same piece of crushed toilet paper in a different version. So that's different. You can ignore me. But for most of what we do, it's about discovering the soul of the client, not necessarily imposing our own soul upon them. And that's how I would encourage everybody to look at the process. And the two last things I would tell people is, if possible, once you get that information together, all of those folders and information, in the old days, they used to be ripped out of magazines and they used to hand us all sheets. Really see if you can find that talent locally, whether it's the interior designer, the architect. I mean, sometimes it's not possible, or sometimes what you want is so finite that it's not there, but really and truly try first to take that information and find that person. Also, communication with that person is key. There's so many relationships that I see that break down because of a lack of sort of communication between the designer and the owner. And so that, to me, should be rated very, very high. If you don't feel like you can communicate with that person, you're going to be connected with this person for sometimes 2.5 years. You're going to have good days and bad days. You need to feel like you're being heard. So anyway, so that's a little bit my quick review of how I would recommend people think about interviewing an architect. Janice, why don't you go next?
Thank you. And I think you made some great points. And I also want to say that I, too, I'm a huge fan of Chauffeur Awarding. So, and I remember those days back then. I think when it comes to a landscape architect, we are, for residential work, with an architect and an interior designer, we are a supporting player. You know, we're rarely the first choice unless you're just doing a sculpture garden or, you know, you're just doing a garden, in which case we wouldn't necessarily be with another professional. But I think it's important to have somebody who has the willingness to learn from the other people you're hiring, and to be in lockstep, complete lockstep with them, so that the landscape and the house and the interior design are all absolutely singing the same song the same way. And I think that for landscape architects, the training is so varied and so all over the place, depending on what university they may have gone to. I think what you should look for is versatility and experience. And again, a willingness to learn what may be needed for your particular site. I certainly think legacy and experience is important, and just developing enough knowledge. I mean, if you've been in the business 10 years, you've only had 10 springs. You've only had 10 winters. You know, you really haven't had, I mean, we have a year-long living, breathing experience with nature. And it takes a long time to know what she's up to. So quite different from, what you're doing on the inside or with the architecture. So I think that experience would be key for me, flexibility, and somebody who is clearly a leader in what they're doing, that is willing to collaborate, but is also a leader, because I don't think you become a leader unless you have integrity and a certain amount of accountability to all the people you work with and to your profession. So I would think that everyone should be, that anyone is interviewing should have all of the skills and the technical ability and the ability to communicate and the ability to get a project completed, that those are the basics. But is somebody going to truly put the team playing and even the innovation first? I think that would be very important to me. It would be very important to me that somebody had done a few houses first and had seen at least 7,000 end tables before they were choosing mine. But, I think that's why we have teams. That's why we have interns. That's why we have younger project managers. And that's why we have leaders. So that, you will get all of this experience in who you hire.
Everything you've said, Janice, is really resonates. As far as speaking to an owner, and how do you find an architect or designer or design team, I think that's one of the biggest challenges for an owner. I would say, as I'm trying to think how people find us. Certainly, if we look back to the olden days, days of yore, it was magazines, it was word of mouth, and we did not have the internet. And now, fortunately, there's no barrier to having your work out there, and so people can be more educated and really understand an architect's work or a designer's work before they even pick up the phone. I find that my clients, by the time they find us and call us, they've immersed themselves in our work in some degree, and they're ready to kind of have, they're not in the discovery mode anymore. They're really trying to figure out who we are and whether it's a good fit. The COVID, I hate to bring up a sore subject, but that we're working with someone in the Middle East right now, and that arm's length that is happening now, that inability to be in the same room, and really have that kind of develop a warm relationship, and that relationship of trust, and it's a challenge right now because a lot of owners are not traveling. Our work is all over the place, and that becomes something that we're hoping to overcome. I mean, we do have Zoom, so the technology seems to have arrived at exactly the right time. It's a tool, but it doesn't replace, really being able to, it's a, as you say, David, it's a bespoke service, and as such, it's the subtlety, it's the listening beyond the words sometimes about what people are saying, because they're not the experts. They may not even have the language that they're trying to express. And what you're trying to do when you're listening carefully at some of the first interviews is, what is it they're trying to say? What will resonate with them? How can I take their feelings, their words? Sometimes they're somewhat awkward, and understand how you can contribute to the built environment in a really creative and positive way with your, all of your experience and expertise, and also speak to their desires, of which, yes, a lot of them are programmatic. I need 3 bedrooms, I need dining room, I need this, that, and the other. But it's that intangible design part that, you really are trying to express yourself professionally, but give the owner something. We had a client who said, I knew we were hiring a firm that would be able to do its job, but we didn't think we'd be getting a masterpiece. And that sounds like bragging, but in fact, that's what we strive for. We want to give somebody something that is so special. It's like having a piece of art that they walk by every day that enhances their lives and, will be cherished, I guess.
Because it's built on the DNA of them, not you. And that's the beauty of bespoke design. I agree. It's interesting you made the comment about the clients now already know your work. Because when we started the internet, I mean, this is whatever is 15 or 20 years ago, I'm thinking to myself, who would possibly buy art on the internet? It's like, remember we used to have Yellow Pages ads. And like, who would possibly buy art from the internet? And almost immediately it was like, people were calling up and they had already vetted like you down to either 1 or 3 architects, and they knew more about you than you could possibly imagine. It's just a real new dynamic that's interesting. And it's interesting that you brought that up. Suzanne?
Yes, I do think that the interesting thing today, and I mentioned before, the clients today are very sophisticated. And I always tell my office, the clients, people that hire designers, they love design. Or they don't they go to the other stores. So we already are getting a kind of a vetted group when people come and interview us. And one of the things that's kind of ended up being a huge part of all of our responsibilities is how we are presenting ourselves, like you said, on the social media, on the internet, and our web pages, our websites, because all of our clients are really doing a lot of research and homework before they do edit down the people they're going to interview. And so many designers today, as all of us have looked in the previous world to publications, getting our work published, sharing, but a lot of us are doing our own books today. And the reason it's resonating and being such an important part of all of what we're doing is we can share our own philosophy and share our own message and really share what we love to do with design, because the options today, there's so much talent. And it's an exciting time in the design world because there are so many different ways you can go in design. So the clients, I'm always surprised how when they do come to talk to us, they really are often really sophisticated. They really have done their research. They really love design. Sometimes they'll come to an interior designer first before hiring an architect. Oftentimes they'll hire the architect first. And as Janice said, we always insist on them bringing in the landscape architect as part of the team in the very beginning, because today's homes, really what we're trying to do is, even if we're doing classical architecture, is have them, it's all about how you're living. It's all about creating a lifestyle. It's not just, design is not as linear as it used to be. And I think it's a very exciting time for design. And one of the things we all have loved the most about what's happening in design is, like you said, obviously listening to our client, reflecting them, but also the collaboration. Because once we get our team together, and the client is one member of that team, a big member, obviously, but it just makes the process really special, exciting, and successful.
Fantastic. Andrew?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to, for when the clients are making a decision, it comes down to communication. I think so much, as we've talked about, so much is available through visual media to understand style and experience and portfolio. What you really can't replace when you're doing the interview process is that one-on-one connection. So I would encourage clients to really get to know the principal, the team, and see how that conversation goes. We've all been at different dinner parties and cocktail parties, and you can talk to someone for hours and come away feeling energized, or you can talk to someone for 10 minutes and feel drained. Everyone's communication style is different, and you want that person that you're going to communicate with that's going to energize you for that 2 to 3 year process, like you said. I mean, it's a long relationship, and communication is the cornerstone to that. To making it an amazing collaboration, our best projects are definitely the ones where we've had the best client communication, the best team communication. I'd say beyond just hiring architect specific, talk to the principal, talk to the team, see how the communication goes, but also look at the team, other team members you're hiring, because we get hired second or third in the line behind interior designers and landscape architects, not infrequently. So, I mean, the order isn't as important as much as can they collaborate? Have they worked together before? Because it's not just a firm you're hiring as the separate firms. You're hiring a team for an entire process. And I think when you can find those teams that work together, or even if they haven't, if they're like-minded and you get them on the phone together and it's just clicking, that respect, that rapport, and kind of that give and take in terms of who's taking the lead when is really important. Because I think in 3 years as a client, you want to be served by your team. You don't want to be in the middle as the referee. And I think that understanding that communication pattern is the quickest way to find that out.
That's interesting. I mean, we all said the exact same things. There's a lot to learn here. I mean, after schematic design is done, at that moment, I encourage my clients to get the contractor on board at that moment, get the landscape architect. If they're not already hired, get the landscape architect and get the interior designer all hired. And I haven't even just started design development. And so that team is a different way of thinking about things. But if you combine that to what you were saying, Andrew, which is really communication is also transparency. So you put those two together, and now you have the two most important things that are going to make a long-term relationship. So that was great answers. Thank you. So the next question I had, or this is a question, is that, like, do you have a favorite interview process that you remember, and what made it interesting? And it's a very short story, but I think it'll be interesting for people to hear about the communication between the architect or the designer and the client. So I was working on, I had just started out, so this had to be, 1990 range, and a patron of the arts had bought a modern summer house in Narragansett, and they called me up, and they wanted to do a renovation to this modern house, and let's just say that the budget was $600,000 to $800,000 or whatever. $600,000 at the time was nice. They actually they invited 3 architects and gave them stipends to do a design competition. And at the time, it was like $2,500, and they handed us the set of existing conditions drawings that they had. And they said, don't worry about the fact that you didn't document them. You're not going to be responsible for anything. You're going to do your own documentation later if you get it. And literally, we went into a design competition, and we ended up getting it. But I just thought it was just an amazingly wonderful way to think about the patron saying, I'm going to evaluate how they deal with us, solve our problems, and see their art, and then I'm going to hire the one I want. So anyway, I think if everybody could take a piece of that away, I think there's something to learn about, choosing an artist. But so, Janice, what are your thoughts? Do you have a memory?
Yeah, I have a pretty interesting memory. I mean, all interview processes are interesting, right? And one wants to recognize when people are price shopping and get right out of there, because ultimately everyone costs the same in a lot of ways. But this was, I was vetted very carefully through a design director for a client. And I went through quite a long, normal interview process, referrals, looking at my work, long interviews, and I was chosen to be given the project. And so then I met the client, who was an extremely interesting and dominant man. And I went in to speak with him, and he looked through all of my things on the table. It's a big conference room, he's pretty far away. He goes, so I understand you're good at what you do. I said, I am. He said, are you? He said, other people have told me you are, but are you good at what you do? I said, yeah, I am. I'm very passionate about it. I believe in it enormously. I said, but I would really appreciate some interaction so I can give you exactly what you want. And he just made this smile. He said, that's your job. He said, that's your job to give me what I want. I don't know what I want. You're supposed to give me what I want. I said, okay, sounds good. He said, and whatever you do, got up to leave the room. That was like all of 60 seconds. He said, whatever you don't, F it up. And that was it. I just sat there. Okay. I certainly wouldn't intend to F it up. I certainly don't want to F it up. I said to him as he left. He said, good, so no. And that was that.
That's great.
Went on to
And
a phenomenal relationship that's still going on about 10
oh,
years.
that's great.
Um,
And
Hi, I just wanted to comment, on David, on what you said. It's sort of a bake-off. We've been in several bake-offs with other firms for clients who felt that they wanted to, they couldn't quite make up their mind. We have won both times, so that was always satisfying. But I think, Janice, it's interesting. You were as you were speaking, I was thinking about a book I read by Jeanette Sadet Khan called Street Fight, on her interview with Mike Bloomberg, and he said the same thing as she.
Yes, he might have.
So I wonder if that was who said that to you, but maybe you can't say.
She's a very interesting woman, Jeanette Sadekhan.
Yeah, I don't know her, but I'm a great fan of her and her work and what she's done for New York. And she's, if you don't know, she was the former transportation director of New York City, appointed by Mike Bloomberg, and now works for the Bloomberg Organization. And she's written this great book called Street Fight. And that's a bit of a segue into urbanism. And that's something that, I went back to school recently. I've just got my master's degree in sustainable urban development from Oxford. And it was a program for executives where you could go back and forth to England, and you have a class, and you know, that you all work with. There were 28 of us, and it was a very interesting exposure to the whole entire universe of sustainable urban development and design. And I think what was missing from that program was the design part. I think there was a lot of policy, and I was just very anxious to get back to my world of design, where you're creating beautiful things. And how do you bring beauty into policy? Into we're in the domestic realm on this panel, but that's all well and good, but can we expand that into the public realm? So that's a little bit off topic, David, but I just wanted to bring.
I love it.
Up.
That's great. Suzanne?
But yeah, because I'm now thinking, is the topic when the clients get ready to hire us, what I find today, it's not as linear as we might all want it to be. And I have two stories that I think were very fun and interesting. And it kind of makes me always remember that when we're in our design world, business kind of unfolds at different times and not always as linear planned as we want. But I do always have like goals and aspirations of people I would love to work with. But one of the times I went to a book event where I did a talk in Fort Worth, and 6 years later, I get a call from someone in Fort Worth, and they hired us to do a really big project. And it was just interesting that it was 6 years later. And you kind of, I always think that that was kind of so interesting, because you always kind of made me think that there's such an immediate reaction. But our world, as we all said, the process is long. Sometimes people then start collecting and thinking about what they want for the future, and then they see the person that they might think would be right for a special project. And then another funny story, I think it's kind of interesting, and it was interesting when I posted about our talk on my story, my client responded, and she responded to me. Her response was, you just take a hike with the client. And what had happened for me, maybe only like 3 years ago, I went out to the ranch at Malibu to kind of get, detox and kind of hike and get you on one of those systems, and you're always in a small, intimate group of just 12 people. And I met this really fun person, a couple of women, and I met them, and she had a big job in New York, and they recognized me eventually, even though we're in no makeup and workout clothes. And so 3 years later, I would see them in New York. I kept running into this client or this friend, and she called me to do a really big project in Palm Beach, one of my favorite places. And it just was so interesting because her comment was, you just take a hike and then look what happens. So I think what's so fun today about design and how we're all connected is we might have a plan of what we want our work to be, but clients come from all over, and also the interactions even we have with each other. Because one of my other favorite stories is later on I was going to talk about with Andrew, a collaboration we had. And a lot of that happens when we're in our different environments where we're not really linear thinking about how work is going to come to us. Excellent.
Andrew?
I think for me, there's two moments that stand out in terms of the interview process that were memorable. The first one was when I was partnered up with our founder, Jim Strickland, and we had an interview where I think we were the long shot for a sizable farm site outside of Charlottesville. And we were competing against several of our more prominent peers that were highly known as classical architects at the time, where we had done classical architecture, but we were more of a vernacular firm. And we just said, you know what, let's just be ourselves. We showed up and we were very passionate, and we spoke more about the outbuildings, the program, the chicken coop, the hay barn, all the components that went into the farmstead with our true selves. I mean, we were definitely nerds on display. We were all in on all aspects of the farm. But again, I think that passion and that honesty and the fact that we also didn't try and say we knew more than we did in some of the classical arenas, and just explained our process on research and our process on working with the clients and the experts, it won the day. And we were thrilled. And those clients are still clients of ours, 14, 15 years later in multiple projects. And really that team, that collaboration team with the landscape architect and interior designer is what helped us launch our office in Manhattan. So to Suzanne's point, you never know where these things are going to take you. But I think as long as you're always true to yourself and honest with your clients and passionate about what you do know and willing to work and learn and collaborate, it can take you places you never dreamed of. And then the second moment that stands out to me, we were in an interview process and a finalist for a country club, the Houston Country Club, and we did not get the project. But again, because we were honest and direct and kind of laid out what we could do and how we envisioned it, the exit interview, and I always try and do this with clients, and regardless of the residential or commercial, the feedback that we got was fantastic and helpful. And some of the things that we thought we were clear in our messaging turns out weren't, and that led to two great club amenity commissions right afterwards, based on that feedback and how we changed our presentation. So, even some things that seem like a negative can be a positive, as long as you kind of just take an earnest and honest and transparent approach. And so it's a client that we never had, but I'm eternally grateful to them.
That's fantastic. What a great story.
That's a great story.
So the next thing is I'd like to understand how you recommend other designers to your clients to be part of the team. So as I mentioned, I get everybody on board very early, and I went through the first decade of my practice, and I really saw my practice is do what you do it well, and I didn't see the connectivity to all of the other disciplines until one day I showed up at a big renovation, a big addition and renovation, and the client came running out to me, and he goes, I love the pergola. He goes, but I think we should change to fluted columns. And I looked at him and said, really, why? And he said, well, I asked the landscape architect, and he thinks they should be fluted, so we should go with fluted columns. And this has nothing to do with but I think all I could think of was like, if somebody asked me about a plant, I wouldn't answer it in a billion years. Like, so I just, so I took that moment and I said, we have to create these teams in the very beginning, and we have to work. And I heard it earlier. I think it was Ann, 1 and 1 is 3. I think that was you that said it. And so that's how I look at every single relationship, is that you get them on board early, you get together, and I literally share schematic designs with my interior designers, landscape architects, before I present them to the clients. And in many cases, we're working together on them. Now, in some cases, I might have a 51% vote. In other cases, I might have a 49% vote. But we're sharing all of our ideas back and forth. And I'm loving the fact that they're listening to me, and you're building something better that you couldn't build by yourself. And that, to me, is, so getting back to how do I do it? I mean, it's literally, I meet the person, it's through, I was never been a good networker, but as I've been to spend time at the AIA and the ICAA now and Design Leadership Network, you meet people, and meeting somebody, and it's the same thing we talk about when you're interviewing your design professional. It's your ability to communicate with them. Well, it's also your ability to communicate with the design professional. I was with somebody, and they said, I don't take telephone calls on the weekend. Okay, good. You do great work. I didn't say that. You do great work, but that's not going to work. So anyway, so I'm going to stop there, but let's continue. Janice, what are your thoughts on how do you build a team?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And team playing is essential. And respect for each other's profession and respect for the process is essential. We're often asked, and generally a client, if they're really interested in doing patronage architecture, they'll maybe choose an architect early on in the process, and they will come and ask us about the communication and how well we're going to work together as a team. But it's probably not going to deter them if that particular professional is not collaborative. But I think that we have learned to work with almost any situation. And again, I think the architects will tell you who they are in their websites and what they talk about and what they credit for their projects. They'll tell you in the interview. And I think, ultimately, the soulfulness of the connection is really important to the client. We have worked in very difficult situations very often where we don't get drawings and we don't get communication and we don't get a lot of feedback, or schedules get missed, though that will end up showing up in the project. And if you talk to other people or builders who worked on the project, that will all come out in the wash. It really will. And really beautiful projects, I think, are always a result of teamwork. And if a project is really beautifully done and beautifully installed, then I generally will be sure it's a good and a happy story about the collaboration. Everybody has a different approach. Everybody that we've worked with has a different approach. And we're up to it as long as the client is the person being served. The client's best interests are at heart for everybody. And I think that will show up in finished work as well.
Awesome. That's great. Great answer. Ann?
Looking back, we've had a pretty long career. Like Janice, we've had the good, bad, and the ugly. And I found sometimes clients, and this is something I would say, if there are people who are not designers tuning in right now and they're thinking of hiring design professionals, usually when you get to a certain aspect of your career where you've worked with a lot of different people, I would say you have kind of your favorites. And it doesn't mean that you can't work, as Janice says, we've worked with, I guess we call it sometimes a shotgun marriage, where, here's my designer, here's, we're all coming together. We don't know each other, and, you just never know who you might meet in those situations. But if the owner comes to you and says, I have this new project, who should I hire? Who do you recommend? Who do you like working with? That to me is always the best, because then we can, especially if you get to know the client, you can say, well, I work with 10 interior designers over my 20 interior designers over my career, but they're all different, and this one would be perfect for this client. So you do have a sense of how to vet design professionals for your owner as you get to know them and you understand their, what kind of style they're after and what kind of approach they have. Sometimes clients come and they feel like divide and conquer. I'm not going to hire the person you recommend because you might be in cahoots with them or something. And that becomes maybe in some industries you get that. It's like maybe there's some distrust there. But I think if I'm going to say anything to any clients, do trust when you've hired your primary design or your first design professional, ask them who they like to work with and trust that relationship has been formed and is going to be kind of a fast track to good design because we already have a working relationship. We already know how to deliver, a good design for the owner. So I don't know if anyone else has had similar situations like that, but Andrew's shaking his head like it's, but I do like the shotgun marriage too, because you end up meeting people that you would never, and working with people you would never have known.
Yeah, the fear of failure is so much higher there. I mean, you're entering a 1.5-year relationship with somebody that there's a 50% chance that you're not going to be 1 and 1 is 3. I just think it's so much better to. I've had clients say, "Listen, I'd like to use this person. Can you interview them and make sure that you can communicate well with them?" So same subject. I've had situations where I said I can't work with this person, and so it's tough to do. You have to look around the office and go, "There's impact there." But I think that is important because if your employees are not going to be happy because this relationship is going to be a bad relationship, then you have to not take the project. I'm sorry to jump in. Suzanne?
Well, the client relationship, there is such a thing as the chemistry between the whole team. And certainly the client has a chemistry with who they hire. So I have a couple of things. A lot of times I think about it as a sense of place. We are all working all over the country now, and even some international. So a lot of times if we're hired, we might look at hiring one of the people that might be in that place. Or if there are people in a location where we know, we oftentimes will recommend they interview a couple of people, not just one person, because there are so many people we love working with and so many professional people that we all interact with in such a great way. So I do think a sense of place has a big part. And, is it a mountain house? Is it a beach house? Is it a city house? That sometimes has a big impact on the chemistry of the team. We're doing a big project in Bermuda right now, and we made the conscious decision with the client to hire the architect that lives in Bermuda for this renovation, because certainly there's all the small details that make it more successful if someone is actually there. But I think today, I always like to have a few people that we might recommend if we're on that part of it, if we're one of the first people to be hired, because there is a chemistry our clients feel, and there's so many talented people that a lot of times it just is how that person might work, how their fee structure might work with them. So there really isn't one linear way that we ever kind of go about having the team put together.
Suzanne, I'll ask you a side question to that, which is, I think the interior designer is a little bit unique, at least from the outside looking in, is that they tend to make relationships with the client and be taken from city to city to city, which I think, maybe I'm generalizing, I'd like to know your thoughts on that. And it seems to me like that's not the way that it works, at least in my world, is they don't take me. But interior designers is just a little bit different. And in situations like that, are you then recommending the other team? And so how often does that happen?
Well, what I have found, interestingly enough, more often Even though I have the relationship with my clients, and I do agree that we do get a more personal relationship, we're there kind of more intimately longer. It seems like more one-on-one with our clients. A lot of our clients today, because of their sophisticated knowledge, they have come to me with architects, even when they've gone, like let's say I have a client here, we had a very successful project, it was even published in one of the big magazines. Then they went to Sea Island, they hired an architect there. And they did that without kind of consulting us, and they didn't bring the architect here that maybe certainly could have done the project. So we have been seeing more of that recently, and I think it's interesting that because our clients, again, as I said, the clients coming to our level of work, they are pretty sophisticated and have a love of design and have done a lot of research. We have another client in Charlotte, and they did a beautiful house there, and they're doing another house in another location, a mountain house, and they hired another architect. And it was not because they just wanted that different experience. We are seeing that even happening in interior design today. Our clients are not only having one house, but many times more than one. And they love the experience. They love the project. They love design. And so they a lot of times like working with different people, and we've all had to not be as personal about it. And it's kind of hard, but I do see that change even for ourselves in design today.
That's
and
great.
Working with our.
Thank you. Andrew?
It really just depends on timing and client. We're fortunate enough that we get quite a bit by landscape architects and interior designers. So, we're kind of coming onto a team that's already been gelled, either whether it's the landscape architect or the interior designer's client. And then, the instances where we're not, if the repeat clients for ours, we try and make a recommendation based on personality fit and aesthetic that we think we like to work, this person will be perfect fit for that team. If it's a new client, kind of more to, I think, Ann and Suzanne's point, we think that the clients need to have an ownership stake in the team that they put together. So we'll recommend 2 or 3 or 4 interior designers at that point, because we really want them to have the responsibility and the investment emotionally of doing the due diligence, getting to know the team members. And same thing with landscape architect, if the landscape architect isn't on board already, making those recommendations. So it's not that we want to make it unnecessarily hard for the client, but if they just say, hire the team, and they don't have the relationship and anything communication breaks down later, there's more of a default to kind of look at us and say, fix it, as opposed to investing in the relationship directly. And that makes it hard if the client is not invested in all the team members, it makes it really hard for those team members that don't have that direct rapport to do their jobs. Because at the end of the day, I think our best product, we can design things without clients. I mean, we do it for spec homes, we do it for developers, but it's not the same joy as, helping a client realize their dreams. And to do that, they've got to share their dreams with us. And the only way to do that is through communication.
So the next question is a point I wanted to thoughts about teamwork, about stories about teamwork that would maybe explain to the client out there the importance of their role in the process, that transparency and connectivity. I have 2 very short stories. The first one was I was working, doing a small renovation, nice renovation on a Royal Barry Wells home, who was a famous architect in the 1930s and 50s for people listening, and very sort of Americana, New England architect. And when I presented the schematic design they didn't have family rooms back then, so I had this family room attached to this beautiful Royal Barry Wills home that didn't exist on a Royal Barry Wills home. And it was all glass, but it was all divided lights, small divided lights. And as I presented it, I love it, but they were looking at an axo of it, and it had pilasters in between a lot of glass. And they kept looking at the pilasters, and they go like, I don't want columns in my house. And I was making the argument, and at one point, the client, who I love, looked at me and he goes, look, David, he goes, you're not making the argument. He said, you're not convincing me. He goes, let's meet again next week. Think about presenting it to me a different way. And I go, oh, okay. Next week I came back and I said, I think you're being tricked because you're looking at a black and white drawing and you're seeing all of these lines like columns, and they're all going to go away. The pilasters are only 1 1/4 inches thick, and it's just going to look like trim work. He said, great, let's do it. So there's an example where the client actually allowed the process to continue. And I have one other great story. This is a long time ago. I was working for a wonderful client. We were doing a bedroom addition, and the client had a long-term relationship with a very talented interior designer. So they had done many, many projects together, and I was young and being brought in. So we designed the master bedroom, and I show up one day to do construction observation, and as I'm walking back, Ina grabs me by the arm, she goes, I got to talk to you. And she drags me back into the bedroom, and she goes, look. And all the walls were painted black. Like everything was painted, it was black. And Ina was like at tears. She was crying. And she goes, I don't know what to do. I don't know if I should say something or how to present it. And I was young at the time. I was probably 30 years old. And I said, you have a long-term relationship with this person. You've had faith in her through all of these years. I said, it's possible that you're not going to like it. I said, but you need to let it happen and then decide. You owe it to her because you're friends and because she's a designer. And sure enough, all the trim got painted white. Crown moldings got painted white. The art everywhere. There was like, you could barely see any trim left. And then you put this bed so big in there that you could barely see anything. And then 100 white pillows. Everything was white with little touches of black around the edges. And it was the most beautiful bedroom you've ever seen. But I would encourage people to have faith in the designer and don't make a rash decision. So that's my quick thought. Janice?
Thank you. That's a great story. That's a really nice story. Very wise at a young age. I think the designer-client teamwork is really built up through trust. And I think our clients tend to be very good at business. And numbers dance in their heads and look magical to them the way plants dance in mine. They're that familiar with them. So the first thing we need to establish is that I understand what the fiscal responsibility is of what we're doing, that I understand the deliverables I need to give them on those dates, and that they understand what they need to be accountable to me for. And clients can take a lot of your time or a small amount of your time. And we have to get a relationship where I set up a deliverable accountability schedule. I've given you drawings, you get back to me by X date, then I'll get back to you by X date, and we can follow through on this process, and it will make sense, and it will work, and it will keep us at the fee that you want us to be at. And any variation from that will develop. And of course, we all know there's a lot of variations, like a 1-year project becoming a 10-year project. I mean, there's a lot of variation. But my favorite story is about a woman, and her landscape is on the cover of my book. And she really dislikes plants. She just does. She doesn't like them. And I didn't realize that about her at the beginning. But she also has the most amount of discipline and one of the finest eyes I've ever seen. And she's a remarkable woman. You could put her with, a garbage man or the Queen of England, and she'd be comfortable with both. And enjoy herself with both. And she held me back and taught me discipline and editing like no one else I have ever worked with. And then over time, about 4 years in, I finally had to sit her down and confront her about the fact that she hated plants and that we did need some plants. And it was a very, she didn't find that funny, and she wasn't really convinced I was right. But, with time, she taught me a couple of things. She came around to see it my way. She's now a huge fan of flowers. But she also taught me what you don't do is sometimes more important than what you do. And that was a huge lesson for me. And as the years have gone on, her children have grown up. They've each bought a big farm, and they have bought her farm. And I mean, these are very beautiful farms, gentleman farms. And I'm working for both of them. And they didn't keep her interior designer, they didn't keep her architect, they didn't keep her builder. But somehow I got kept. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that I really listen to them and what they want. And they feel not only can they trust me, but when needed, I will push back. You know, I might take me a few years, but now we're Rainbow Nation. We even mix the black cattle with the brown cattle with the white cattle. Everybody, it's a free-for-all up there now. The discipline is rolling.
Great. Anne, your thoughts?
I love your story, David, and it speaks a lot about trust for the owner to trust their design professionals. Certainly speak up too, and I'm glad they took you aside and said, you know, it's interesting because I always say that, you know, the relationship with the owner and the architect and the contractor is a three-legged stool, but you have to look at all of the relationships that way that are on the project. And maybe this is a good time to talk about supporting the other design professionals during the bumpy parts of the project. I have worked with designers who don't see it that way. They like the divide and conquer method. Like, I'm going to bring this client into me. They're going to be mine, and that architect over there, you know, their relationship with the owner threatens my relationship with the owner. And I've had some not so great experiences because of that. And it's always better that, you know, you were able to stand up for the designer, and that speaks to your character and your ability to, you didn't have to do that. You could have said, oh, gee, it's a black room. That's crazy. Of course you're upset, you know? So, you know, there are so many ways to approach it from the designer's point of view and from the owner's point of view. I think they have to realize they're working with racehorses here. We're not, you know, we're not kind of run-of-the-mill people. We're highly passionate. We've got a lot of skills. We might be a little flighty. We might be a little, you know, get upset at certain things. But in the end, creating, I think the most successful projects have been when the owner brings all the design professionals together. We worked for Liv Tyler years ago. She was so young. I think she was like 20. She bought a house in the village. It was a total gut. It was a big job, big risk for her to do that at 20. She was single. You know, she wasn't married. I think she had a boyfriend, but whatever. So she was taking this responsibility on herself. She brought all the design professionals together. We all, you know, we were all happy to please her. She appreciated everybody on the site, including all the builders, and, you know, everybody came together for a big party at the start. And at the end, we had another big party. She created such a positive atmosphere of trust and respect and admiration for the designers and the builders that we all sort of, you know, perked up. We were all kind of like, yeah, you're right. You know, we are great. We are going to deliver an amazing project for you because of your humble appreciation of our efforts. And I would say I might go away with, I might sign off on that, just say to an owner, if that's what the question is. Support. We all need support. We, you know, all need kind of like that attaboy and attagirl kind of like, you're doing great, and everybody's needs to work together, and it's a team effort. And the owner can bring, you you know, they're the least experienced and the most powerful team member. You know, so I think they have to realize that they flick an eyebrow and everybody jumps, you know. So their attitude to the project can influence its success, for sure.
Fantastic. Thank you. Suzanne?
Well, I think that I'm kind of thinking about working actually with Andrew on a couple of projects, because I think it's been one of my most enjoyable and successful ways of working, because one of the things that they wanted to do every time they would start when we all got hired and they would start their design development, they would want a meeting with us together as a team before presenting to the client. And that way we could banter and have our ideas expressed in that kind of way that designers love to process and really come up with some of the best results for the client. And I always would say, well, I don't know if I have time to have another meeting before the meeting, because, you know, we're all kind of like, do we really have to have a meeting before the meeting? You know, and yet at the end, we've done this a couple of times, and we really ended up having, certainly one of our most actually special and successful projects, which was more hospitality. But we were able to kind of be thinking and about like what the client might want that they didn't even know what they wanted. And I just love that process. And since that time, I have found it to be really important that I know my own passion and outgoing ideas. I just love to share, but I do see it more successfully done when we can have our team meeting, maybe before we all go to the client after things have started. Because what happens is different personalities of a team member express differently in the meetings. And that way we can all kind of really share the best solution at a time when we're in the same development process. So I was thinking of that as far as what I've continued to learn and to make a successful team collaboration.
Great. Thank you. Andrew?
Yeah, I would echo what Suzanne said. I mean, not just because we're working together and having a lot of fun, but I think that architecture school teaches you to defend your thesis, and I think that not to disagree with what Ann and David, what you said. I think that's important to some degree because we are kind of the hired experts, and the clients are looking for us to kind of reassure and stand our ground when we think we're right. But I think what I've learned in practice, and I've learned much more from working with interior designers, is also how to frame questions. So clients will kind of not attack, but will come back with something they don't like on a design and offer a solution more often than actually pose a question. So if I can kind of receive that input, not get defensive, and kind of get them to articulate not the proposed solution or counter design, but what are they trying to solve? What don't they like in the design, or what did they see as a flaw in the design that we've presented? And that same dialogue happens with Suzanne, happens with interior designers. There's so many different perspectives that can be brought to a design that if we don't have those meetings and that communication, I could be overlooking an important perspective. I could be overlooking something that's a great opportunity for an outdoor room, and a connection that if I move 2 windows over suddenly makes that connection to the outdoor space magical as opposed to an afterthought. So being open to that feedback, but not just reacting, but processing, reposing the question, understanding what program element the client's trying to solve, what program element the team members are trying to bring to the table, I think just adds a richness to the design that we could never do single-handedly on our own. So from that shift from a linear process of handing off and collaborating and being cordial to an entrenched kind of rolling up our sleeves and drawing on the same drawings together, it's one of my favorite parts about our profession.
I love that the concept of working with the client and working through problems rather than a yes or a no, and encouraging that. It's for the same reasons that I tell clients, for the most part, please don't share your designs with all your friends, because sometimes there's more than one good solution, and it's just you're going to think it's the right and the wrong solution, but there could be 2 good solutions, but I could have something, or another designer has a reason why this one is good for you. So it's all about communication. I love it. So my next point is somebody, Linda Floyd actually asked, when are we going to get to fees? Well, we're not going to get to fees because we can't talk about fees because it's against the RICO statute, and we're all going to get in trouble and tell about how much we charge. So we can't do that. But I do want to talk about the contract and the importance of the contract, because we all have our different ways of dealing with contracts. And I even, going through all my years through the AIA in discussions, there's a large amount of the people that I talk to in those discussions that don't use the AIA contract. That, well, the clients they get aggravated because it's too long, so that I have this 2-page thing. And I'm like, I use the AIA contract. It's like 23 pages long. It's been modified by my attorney years ago, and every time it's updated, he updates it, and there's only like 6 changes to it, so it's pretty easy for a client to see the changes that I made. Total transparency, but setting a relationship off in the beginning and having everybody know everything eliminates all the surprises. And one of the biggest fears I have as an architect, or any designer I think would have, is that the project melts down at the end. It melts down at the end because all of a sudden your fees are going from X to Y, and they're looking at it going, well, maybe I don't need the interior designer now. Maybe I don't need the architect now. Maybe, and so by starting with the AIA contract in the beginning, I mean, again, I can't give fees, but I tell you that I have a fixed fee. It's based on a percentage. In my case, it's based on a percentage of the construction costs. So that's it. And so if a client wants to negotiate, I'm like, well, you liked all the work on the website. Each one of those clients paid that amount. I can't discount you. It's an insult to them. So there's my fee. So once they've accepted that fee and they hired me, they don't talk about the fee anymore. It's on a spreadsheet. They okay, yeah, I know I'm paying them X amount of money. And so, but I've had clients say to me that we've had personal relationships, and they'll say, we don't need to sign a contract. I'm like, we don't need to sign the contract. I said, but you're going to read the contract and you're going to understand it, and then we can shake hands and have a cocktail. I said, because there's no way that you're going to call up with questions later about something in the contract. So that's the way that I work, and I'm curious your approaches to it, especially with regards to when people ask you to make changes that you're uncomfortable with. Janice?
Thank you. I mean, that's very accurate when you're talking about full knowledge and transparency. One thing I learned early on, especially, I may often work with the one or two of the partners, and that may be the woman, but I am talking to very sophisticated business people, no matter what, very sophisticated and very successful. And they want to know their costs going into a project. They do not want an unknown cost at the beginning when they're hiring a designer, because they know there's certain things they can't control, and they're trying to find what they can control. And I respect that, and I understand it. So I have right away discussed my piece with people. I'm very honest about it. And I can be flexible. They'll prefer a fixed cost, and I'll do that as long as there are extra work provisions, especially in the design process. And especially if the project takes 6 or 7 years, when I have really done my fixed fee based on 3. The problem with that is we come in at the end with a very big amount of our work, and they're usually completely over the process. They've had it, the project is late, and they are completely spent in energy, not necessarily money, but in energy for the process. So I like to make sure that we, really establish the entire end process, which is the planting, all the other hard and soft landscape has gone in, and have them actually purchase and secure those contracts, because otherwise there is no budget left. And I can tell you that for sure. And a lot of clients will say, I want an award-winning project. Well, you can't get an award-winning project day one. without a certain, I mean, I liken it to an interior designer. I made, if you buy someone a $300 couch, it is a $300 couch. It's lousy. It will only get worse, right? If I get you a small plant, it's not a cheap, lousy plant. It's just a small, young plant that will become a beautiful plant. But that's not how they see it. And there's very little patience for that. So I'm very clear with them also that I don't want to build them for time I'm not spending. I have a lot, I'm very fortunate. I'm at a certain age and I have, a lot of work and a lot of people I want to work for. And if they want to cut my services to X, Y, and Z, I'm fine with that. Absolutely fine with that. And I will, negotiate the way that they want to pay, but they really want to know their costs. So I like that you said a fixed fee, because that is what they want to hear, that I find, something they can control. And then we've all been through the process and known when that can work for us and when it can really hurt us.
It's a fixed fee based on construction cost. And the key is, again, as I said, after schematic design is done, very early in the design development, and hopefully the interior designer, the landscape architect, and the landscape and the contractor are all on board, and your schematic design is done, there's big spreadsheets right there. So right there, I'm putting allowances in for $50,000 for kitchen cabinets, $27,000 for appliances, and you're putting in the pool and the cover and the walls, and this big spreadsheet is presented to them, and we're just beginning design development. That's transparency, and if there's a problem, it's going to come out there. And I think one little side thing about landscape, which is, it's like just a really tough thing, is that we do these beautiful houses, that the houses are done and the interiors look unbelievable. And like, you can photograph the house, but your art takes 3 to 4 years to actually grow in, to actually be at where you envision it in your head. And it's always this dilemma, like, how long do I wait before I photograph the house? I'm sorry, I jumped sideways.
They have to understand from the very first conversation I have, they have to start thinking about what it's worth to them on a yearly basis. Because if they're not maintaining it, there's nothing. There's absolutely nothing in 3 or 4 years. And every January, I get a rash of phone calls where they look at their records and their accounts for the year, and they see this gigantic number on landscape maintenance. And they're sure they can get it down by changing contractors, or what could we do differently? And you can't. And so therefore, we have the discussion early on, because a low maintenance landscape is a parking lot with weeds in it. We all know what that is. You can't sort of be, I'm not that into you with your landscape. You can't just date it. You've got to marry it. And once you marry it and you lock in, you can get something very potent and very beautiful. But if you don't commit, and it's just a date or two, you get nothing, absolutely nothing.
Right.
So, they can't just give me back the ring in the middle of the project and say, oh, by the way, I don't have any money left to plant it. You're not going to get what you're looking for.
Right.
So, it's a complicated relationship, because it needs monitoring. And we need to stay in a very good relationship with the client to get it where we need it to be.
Excellent.
That's very important.
And how do you deal with contracts and clients from the beginning?
We, like you, have a percentage fee, and we found that it's very difficult at the beginning of a project to know what that project is. There are just too many variables at the beginning. So a percentage fee allows it's sort of like, what's the phrase? A tide floats all boats, or something. It's if the project is modest, then the fee is modest. If the project is complicated, then the fee rises to it. We do a fee cap. That allows us to, it's an hourly to a fee cap, so that allows us to capture all of our hours, and the fee cap is just to give that owner, as you say, some sense of, well, it'll never go over X. Unfortunately, we've found that clients focus on that fee cap. It's like, oh my God, that fee cap, that's a lot of money. It's like, well, hopefully we'll never get to that. That's only like both of our contingencies, so that I don't have to go back to you because I've negotiated a very low percentage and go back to you and say, by the way, you added a lot of scope during the project, or it was a very difficult renovation and we found a lot of difficulty working through the fact that there are beams running through the pipes or whatever. So that's the way we do it. I just wanted to also comment on Janice. I'm glad you're a young woman because you will be able to see all of your gardens. Between the two, I've got interior designer on one side and I've got the landscape on the other. Our professions are very different. Suzanne's profession, she has to be kind of a general contractor. She's providing actual stuff. Architects don't provide stuff. We're not responsible for the couch that arrives that's got a rip in it. And Janice, this phrase has always stuck with me. A garden is not a garden without a gardener. So you've got that, like you say, that ongoing, the more gardens you design, the more headache you have because you're thinking, oh my God, what's her name's garden look like this year? Is she gonna call me? I don't have that. We are bricks and mortar. We do our job. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Maybe there's something that comes up in 5 years, but so just that's it.
That's great, Ann. Thank you.
Thank you.
Suzanne?
So we have a two-part phase in our contract, but I have a very small contract that's maybe 3 pages long, and it's just really an outline because some of our contracts will clients will come back with a very big contract if they want to get their lawyers involved. But with our design services, I have found and the outline has worked well for us. And part of it is our design fees in the first phase. And then the other part, when we're purchasing and ordering the furniture and the product that goes into the house. But the biggest thing that I have found to be such an integral and part of my team is I have a full-time CPA in my office. She's there 5 days a week. And I cannot tell you how much time she spends with our clients. She is really the key to, I think, a successful design firm, watching for ourselves and our clients, all the transactions that go through, because designers, we're in a volume business that clients want to feel comfortable that you are really watching how they spend their money. And I just feel that that's such a big part of our business side. So we keep our contract very minimal, but very outlined. And as you said, very transparent. And that has been working very well for us.
I have a follow-up question, Suzanne. I think that of I think my clients have the most difficult time when I go through a process and I'll get 3 designers, 3 landscape architects, 3 designers that I think I actually start with a process where I'll get like 6 and I'll say, choose 3 that you like, and then we'll interview them. And so then either I know them or we have relationships. So now they're being interviewed. But I find that the interior design, the proposals are so different because the way that you charge is so different that I can see my clients like heads come off because just to compare the way, okay, the cost of the markup on furniture versus the hourly and so, I don't know what has to be done, and it's a whole separate conversation or a whole separate Zoom call, but I can see clients like just get very confused when it gets to that point of comparing.
Yes, we have seen that a lot in the interior design business. A lot of designers do work differently, especially the way they mark up the furniture, and you'll see it a lot when young designers start in the business, because maybe their overhead is different than the designers that we've been in business for a long time. And it is always a challenge because I have lost a number of jobs because maybe because they don't understand the contract. And later on, they've come back to me and ended up actually spending more money because they didn't realize the way we had kind of structured our fees as compared to another designer. But I think that I will say, yes, that is true in the interior design world. It is because it's a product-based part of the business that it is all done very differently.
Yeah. Andrew?
We use AIA formats as well as a basis. There are times where we have our own format instead, but it's based heavily on AIA. So it just depends on the location and the project type. Because we're doing not only high-end bespoke residential, but we're also doing planning, civic, and commercial work. So I think the big takeaway, though, for our agreement format is similar to what you and Ann talked about having a fee that is reflective of the scope of work and the level of complexity. So we don't want to be punitive to simpler designs, and we also don't want to unnecessarily take the burden of a more complex design. But I think the key to that is when we're negotiating the contract is making sure that the clients are reading the contract. I think some clients are hesitant to get into the weeds and negotiate, and we encourage it. The clients that have some questions from their attorneys or have questions about the agreement, I try and tell them, this is great. You're reading it, you're understanding it, you know this is the basis of how we're going to communicate and work. If I can't defend this to you now or explain it to you in a way that you understand, that's not good moving forward. So this isn't a conversation that gets better with age. This is a conversation to have now. And so that we're all have the same expectations moving forward. I think a big part of the contracts that tend to get overlooked, it gets focused on fee structure. To me, one of the biggest parts is client responsibilities, making sure they understand their role in the process. It's not just a yes or no, I approve, I disapprove. There's timing of when they make decisions and how quickly they respond can greatly affect cost and affect the process for the whole team. The amount of thought that they put into it ahead of time in terms of understanding their program versus kind of figuring it out as we go. We've got agreements that can allow for all that. I mean, there's a lot of clients that come to us that don't know program, don't know what they don't know. They just know that they've got this area, they've got this beautiful land, and they want a house. So we'll go to maybe an interim hourly structure to help them figure out kind of big picture bubble diagrams, help them figure out their program, and then we'll write a contract for the architecture once that's defined. So it really just depends on the level of complete thought that they have. The AIA contract is great when there's a set program and set parameters, but when the client's trying to figure that out, it can be challenging. So we try and have some flexibility. But client responsibilities, understanding the process is paramount, because to your point, otherwise it's going to blow up at the end. And a lot of times when they say, why is that happening? And I'll point to the agreement. Well, I didn't read that. That's not a good recipe for expectations. So we try and make sure we go through that as much as possible at the front end.
The AIA agreement, which is what we use, and certainly our professional liability insurance encourages it. And as you know, I find it so daunting I use it weekly. I know it pretty well. But I can imagine what it's like for an owner to get this document in their inbox. It's not a friendly document. It's just not. It's not easy to read. It's not easy to understand. If you have been through the process, you might understand what they're talking about and the way they describe additional services. I have a lot of problems with it. But it's a copyrighted document. You don't really want to alter it too much. And, I would say I'm just lodging a public complaint about it.
I'm going to piggyback on both of you and Andrew. Andrew, I would encourage, especially if there's any young people here, that don't be blown away by the size of it and that you're going to intimidate your clients. Because a good client, usually a successful person, is going to understand the power of a good agreement. And so don't think that you're going to lose. If you lose a couple of jobs because they're looking at this big contract, that, like you said, is the rule set that helps you solve things as you go through the process. And to understand the rules in the beginning eliminates a whole bunch of those problems going forward. So get it out of your head, read it really well. And again, if you want to customize it to yourself. And then, Ann, I gotta tell you that I've been in business for whatever, 31 years or whatever. And I haven't had a single person ask me if I've had professional liability insurance. And I mean, for an architect, that could range from $5,000 to $15,000 a year. Now, if somebody asked me that, I'd be like, okay, are they going to sue me? But the reality is that in that AA contract, you have to write down what your liability insurance is. And for those of you that don't know, I mean, the professionals have to get it. And that means that if I basically have all debt and I make a mistake, I can't go bankrupt, and I can't. So basically, you have no ability to go after me unless. So it's just an interesting and important thing is to have clients be aware of. It's part of the process. Is professional liability is having it, because there's a lot of people that don't. A lot of people self-insure. Well, if you're self-insuring and you're 32 years old, that's going to be a pretty small insurance policy. So I have one last question, which is a fun question before we go to any Q&A, if there's anybody that has any questions. So if you had a nice juicy budget, and who would you hire as a designer in your own field for your dream house? And so it's a two-part question. It doesn't have to be that long, but I think it'll be fun for people in our industries to hear what we have to say. And in my case, historically, there's no one close. It would be Edwin Lutyens. And I had the opportunity actually to walk through the British Embassy with Andrew a couple of years ago, looking at detail after detail after detail. A bunch of us were probably there. And when you're walking through his house, he is playing with the historic details at a level that is so far beyond anybody I've ever experienced in my life, to the point where it was a couple of details I remember talking about where Andrew, we were looking at it going, I would never let that off my drawing board. It just looks wrong. And he's screwing with you because it's beautiful. That's how good he was. It's sickening how good I love his work, and I can't wait to see more of it. And then for somebody today, getting back to regional, although Tom Kligerman's work isn't like mine, so you would think that I would go with somebody, if looking at my work, that it would be more traditional. I think that his work is so genius in the respect that we had him speak in Boston. I mean, I believe that what he's doing actually is a movement that started in the 1700s, 1800s, and this whole rejection of classicism, and then flipped over to America with the shingle style and appreciation of traditional architecture, but then transformed into an elegant, restrained modernity that I am not capable of doing. And so if I had an unlimited budget, I think that would be my first choice. He's wonderful. So Janice?
Oh, thank you, David. That's fun. That's really fun. So if I could do historical first, I would have Ellen Biddle Shipman design my garden, because her layouts were so soft and yet so beautiful, and really on the grid system, which I love. And I would have Gertrude Gico do the planting, of course. I mean, what other choice is there? But in current time, I think I would have Ginny Bloom do my layout, because I love her respect for architecture and the way she locks into it, but also nature. And then I would have Marco Polo Stefano, who's retired from William Hill, do all my planting. But I would have Stephen Scaniello do my roses.
Awesome. Fantastic. And?
Historically, I would say Bertram Goodhue is someone I became very familiar with in my hometown of Honolulu. He designed the Art Academy. And he, speaking to regionalism, he married, there is no certainly kind of vernacular Hawaiian architecture other than, grass huts. So he took all these Eastern influences and kind of married them up with, it's genius what he's done. And he had just come off the San Diego exposition where he did Mediterranean revival architecture, but he didn't do that in Honolulu. He came up with his own brand. So he's one of my he's such a beautiful draftsman. He designed typefaces. He was just a Renaissance designer. He's somebody and of course, all the great work he's done in New York and around. My contemporaries, I think Richard and I always talk about Michael Ember as being, and again, he's such a regionalist, and he has great reverence for materials, and his work is not bombastic, and I just think he's a real talent, and he's somebody I'd love to work with. If we weren't designers, we might hire him to do something.
So Michael Ember and I sat next to each other at Chopin and Wharton as scribes in the 1980s.
Oh, wow.
So it was there. Joe Moore was there, Laura Kaler. It was so a very, very dynamic and fun place. I adore Michael. He's a friend, and regionally, but he's about as good as it gets. I totally agree. That's a great choice. Suzanne?
I would love to work with Jean-Michel Frank. I love everything French, but what I loved about the French modern is, of course, set in all the beautiful classical buildings. And that juxtaposition has just always been a really big influence. And I've always loved for years, probably because of my commercial background and design at Cincinnati, of bringing modern things into more classical environments. And then for today, I love both John Saladino and Stephen Sills are my two favorites. I have so many inspirations, but I do love and have been inspired a lot from their work.
That's a great answer. Andrew?
I think for past architects, there's all the examples given so far have been great and certainly top of the list. But for me, it would be this Sir John Soane. After going with my wife to London, she was at a work conference, so I had a free pass all day to do just architecture. And my first stop was his house, and it was my only stop. I just spent the whole day sketching details, absorbing, and I had not planned to do that. But his use of light, his sense of whimsy, his playfulness with the classical orders and proportions, it didn't quite make as much sense or was as moving on paper as it was when I was there. It was life-changing and formative for me. The idea of designing with light in a classical and traditional sense was breathtaking. Similarly, and not too far afield for today's designers, it would be Craig Hamilton out of Wales. I was introduced to him and his work by Betty Dowling, who is the esteemed architectural history professor at Georgia Tech. And his use of the classical language as a living tradition and adding to that continuum in an inventive, playful, and powerful way. It has the sophistication of Soane and Lutyens, but it also has kind of the power and the creativity of Leon Creer. So it's something that for me, and having been a student at the University of Miami and really kind of getting immersed in a lot of Leon Creer's work, it was just eye-opening to see what he's quietly been doing. And if you're not familiar with him, I encourage you to check it out. His work is breathtaking.
What such great answers. Thank you. So if anybody has any questions, they can type it in the chat area. We have one which is when should a designer decline work for a potential client? And we probably all talked about this, other than the fact that it's the most difficult thing to do in the world is to reject work that with a client that after all of these years is probably not a good relationship. And what's even worse about it is that when times are difficult and there's a couple people who's the work for you and they're your family and they're going to be affected by that decision, and you tend to want to make things better and just take it anyway. And I can tell you that the 2 or 3 times that we've made that decision, each time it imploded. So All I can tell you is you feel it in your belly. I'd be curious to know what other people think. Janice?
I remember one of my son's entire high
Bless
school
you.
years, the 4 years, were ruined by a particular client. A bad job is a bad job, and it takes a piece out of you, and you never get it back. And I am very aware what can go south. I try to be anyway, and I excuse myself because I found it incredibly hard. And I also find that is part of work. I mean, that's why they call it work, and that's why we get a paycheck. There are very hard jobs out there, but some of them are just too off the walls to take, especially when those people will particularly want to hire you too. That's the interesting part. They want to go back at it. So you have to say no.
Yeah. Any other thoughts, Anne?
I don't know. We find that like maybe we're pretty flexible. We haven't had too many people we've said no to. I can't think of any really. We've had some people we should have said no to that we in the beginning were like our radar went off and we're like this person's off the wall. But when that happens, sometimes I think it's a bad fit all the way around, and often that doesn't come to fruition. So, like I said, we kind of take things like I like Janice's. It's work. That's why they give you the big biscuits. You bring it in, you try to make the best of it, and if it's not a good fit, you just kind of tough it out, I think.
Any other thoughts, Suzanne?
A lot of times you don't really know that it might not be a good fit until you get started.
Yeah.
What we've tried to do is obviously with our contract and setting up limitations like our fee structure, certainly talking to the client how much they need to spend on a project, and our markup does deter people. Hopefully at the time, at the beginning when they need to be detoured. We've had to kind of structure, we only do a total project, not just decorating a room at a time, unless it's a client that we're coming back to kind of refresh. So by putting in some more of those things after we've had experiences that have happened, that has helped not have that happen very much anymore. But I do think it happens to all of us. And, we'll be really excited about a client. We might get a couple clients at the same time. We're really excited about one and one we're happy about, and sometimes it doesn't work out that way. So it's interesting how client relationships unfold sometimes differently than you imagine. And we have a number of projects we start and they don't end up breaking ground or starting. So that's also another challenge. And like you said, we take a lot of projects that we don't like to say no, but we try to limit it in our way we propose our contracts.
Good
So
answer.
they edit us at the beginning.
Andrew?
Yeah, I think it's sometimes it's easy to get tunnel vision. There's a project that is in an amazing location you've always wanted to work in, or it's a program type that you've always wanted to explore, or there's another team members that are great. But I think that if you don't take the time and discipline and diligence to kind of do your homework at the front end, it can bite you. In the times where it's been not a great fit, in fairness, it probably wasn't as good a fit for the client as it was for us. So, I mean, it's not good or bad. It's just, it's that right fit and understanding the expectations. In those instances, we got brought on and maybe didn't have a close relationship with a client or a rapport. So trying to kind of play catch up or understand secondhand or through the team can be challenging. So making sure, back to that contract, that you're laying out expectations, you're setting out a good course for dialogue, because it's not going to solve all the problems at the front end, but to what you said, David, it's going to allow the groundwork for a constructive solution. And I think that's the key. And if you can't get through that initial, whether the schedule's not right or the contract's not right, as hard as it is, it's better to walk away.
Right.
I'm still learning that lesson, to be honest.
It's
We all want People pleasers, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So somebody asked about providing emails. I don't think we have that ability to just provide the emails. Somebody asked, could you provide all of our personal emails? I would encourage you to write our names down and check out our websites, but our IG account, Instagram accounts is really where the world revolves now, and it's going to be pretty easy if you wanted to reach out to us or message us if you have any questions. And so, oh my God, the pressure of having to read live. Here we go. This is, recently I transitioned from 20 years in the luxury hospitality development to affordable multifamily housing. Affordable housing in the urban environment often exists in rich classical architecture context. I challenge myself and my team to bring the talent, passion, and resources historically exclusive to high-end projects to elevate the life experiences of a large community of residents. What would motivate good designers to work in this space? What would we look for in a designer interested and passionate in innovating in this way? Anybody want to take a stab at this?
Well, I can go because we actually do some work in this arena with developers and in some civic settings. It is, you're right, in the context up until like the 20s and 30s, some of the best classical buildings were multifamily and apartment buildings. I mean, in New York is full of them on the Upper East Side. So it's about understanding for us to continue to educate ourselves on the budget, understanding the pressures the developer is facing, and then understanding how to edit and restrain the design where you still have those classical principles, you still have a responsibility to creating public space and to the street, as well as an apartment that is going to be marketable and attractive and lucrative for the developer. So it's a balancing act, but it really gets to understanding kind of the pro forma, the land costs, the construction costs, because we all know how to do the details, but understanding how to get those details into a budget and get it built and still have it as a successful project, that's the key. So editing becomes, I think, the most important skill with that type of work.
Well, that's a great answer. Does anybody have anything to add to that? No, that's great, Andrew. So the next question, it is the job of the architect to direct the client. Oh, it just bounced. Sorry, it just jumped. Here we go. It is the job of the architect to direct the client as to when we stop designing or changing things that would impact schedule or budget during the construction, or should this be done by the contractor who holds a bit more control over the schedule? It is hard to say no to a client, especially if you think of it as being a positive change or design opportunity. So I'm going to start by saying that's a broken way to do design. Now, granted, you can design, build, okay, that's great. And if that's what you're doing, that's fine. But that's not, to me, my experience of where great architecture comes from. It comes from that what we talked about before, which is getting the design team in the beginning. And to me, my construction projects, for the most part, don't start until the design is completely done. Now, there are exceptions where the framing and the envelope is done, and they may start the framing and the interiors can follow, but you can't be doing a true design build and expect that changes aren't going to be affected both to your fee, both to the budget of the building, and to the construction process. So I would say that that's just a broken way to look at you need to convince your client. Go ahead, Ann.
I didn't mean to.
No, please. That's what this is about. Go.
Yeah, I always try to explain to the least experienced team member, who's the owner, that there are 5 phases in the design and build universe here. You have schematic design, and don't move from one phase to the next until you have sign off and completion. And that at least limits the changes. Everybody has a buy-in at schematic design. Everybody understands that design development is still fluid, but you're making it a reality. And there's an opportunity there for the owner to bring in some more ideas. But after design development, you've got construction documents, and then the bidding phase, and then the construction document phase. So if you all have this roadmap and you understand and you accept it, and the least experienced, I think the design team understands it, but if the least experienced is the owner, if they can understand that, then you know, I think it's tried and true. Just go with it and don't try to break up the phasing.
Janice?
Yeah, I'll never forget working with a really good interior designer, phenomenal, turned to me when I had a new idea for the way the paving pattern should go at an already under construction project. He looked at me, big white eye, and said, so the ideas that you've given me up until now were not good ideas? Just like that. So in other words, we've paid you for all of this work and the construction drawing, and they want your best ideas? And then I've never, ever, ever forgotten that. It's a great lesson. And I let everybody here spend the time they need to spend on their designs, and then there is no unraveling. No unraveling. The only thing that happens when you start to unravel an under construction project is bad. It's just bad. If everyone bought their best ideas, yeah, 2 years later you have a new idea. Use it on another project.
This has been 2 wonderful hours that fly by, and I'm so gracious and appreciative of you doing this with me. So thank you very much to you, and again, the ICAA Design Week and the Design Center for putting this together. So goodbye and thank you.